I'm Bronwyn Williams. We're back with the small print, and today our guest is Adriana Marais. So, Adriana, please introduce yourself the way you like to be introduced these days. You've done a lot of interesting things, and we'll get into quite a lot of them today, hopefully. But who are you right now, and what do you care about, and what makes you get up in the morning?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bronwyn. Looking forward to chatting. It's an exciting time for Earth in spite of all the crazy stuff happening. And space is where I'm focusing a lot of my activities. I've got a background in theoretical physics, and was looking at photosynthesis in my PhD, which led me to think about the origins of life and the origins of the building blocks of life in space. And so my childhood love of space came back full circle. And yeah, at the moment we are working on putting a telescope on the moon, the Africa to Moon project. That will be the world's first telescope on the moon as well, if we get it right. And that's in preparation for my long-term goal of exploring planets beyond Earth. But that's an ambitious one, so we'll see how it pans out. Yeah, everyone's going to the moon nowadays, so we've also set our sights a bit closer for now.
So,
And
by we at the moment. So you speak of we putting a satellite on the moon. Who's we at the moment?
yeah, I guess I skipped introducing myself. So, I'm a director at the Foundation for Space Development Africa, along with my very good friend and collaborator, Carla Sharp, who founded the foundation a few years back. So that's the Africa to Moon project under the Foundation for Space Development Africa. I've also founded an organization called Proudly Human, where we are working on preparing for extreme environments, and those may be on Earth or beyond Earth. In both cases, I think we need to prepare technologically as well as mentally. So we are looking at the kinds of teams that can perform well in extreme environments. We're looking at sort of physically extreme environments like Antarctica or the desert, or under the ocean. But of course, the take homes, especially on the team dynamics, will be applicable to teams in any kind of extreme environment, whether that's like on the surface of the moon or in a particularly challenging day here in South Africa.
Yeah, there's nothing not extreme about just living and surviving and
Exactly.
But tell me about some of those expeditions. Have you gone on any yet, or are these theoretical? How practical has the teams in extreme places conversation become so far?
So in 2019, I founded the organization and we were all systems go. I went to Antarctica at the end of 2019, visited the Oman Desert, visited the Namib Desert, a bit later on after lockdown, visited the Florida Aquarius Reef Base, which is an underwater facility. So the location scouts and the planning in terms of the partners that we would work with in each location have been established. So the last missing piece is establishing a contract with a broadcaster, because we want to celebrate resource constraints. So we want to see how little water we can use in the Namib Desert and make that cool, through the technology, but also through the lifestyle sort of choices we make in each of those environments. For example, I think water management is a critical one on Earth and beyond. Power management, obviously, in the colder environments. So we've got the tech partners ready who would be able to provide the different pieces that we would integrate to provide our power, our water, our food, our shelter, and our communication systems. And we want to broadcast all of this, so we need a production partner who's on board to film in these places, including Antarctica over the winter and things like that. So we do need the right partner. So we're still in the pitch phase at the moment with the big broadcasting channels. We don't want to go half measure for this, so we want an international broadcaster. So that's what we're still working on at the moment. I think the teams are ready, schedule providing. We've got a bunch of people who've informally told me they are ready when I send the email to say we're ready to go. So that's the stage for the Off-World project. Yeah, I think there's a big backlog of projects since COVID in terms of film scheduling. So we'll keep pitching every year until we find a good gap to kick that off. And in the meantime, I think it's really exciting, all the different entities, national as well as private, that have been making efforts to get to the moon. So while we had a lot of excitement about Mars running up to the lockdown in 2019, we had 3 missions off to Mars in 2020. So in spite of all of the economic lockdowns and challenges that those teams face here on Earth, the extreme conditions, under those extreme conditions, the US, China, and the UAE all got their missions off to Mars. But I feel like since then, our sites have come, 200 million kilometers away. That's Mars. Slightly closer, almost 400,000 kilometers away is the moon. And we're really excited to have had India become one of the countries who's landed softly, successfully on the surface of the moon lately. China's got multiple landings planned. Private companies have multiple landings planned. NASA, of course, is planning to send crew back there. I think they're still penned in the dates as 2025. I think that may be postponed by a year or two, but this decade we are going to see humans walking on the surface of the moon again. So yeah, an exciting time for thinking about expanding beyond Earth. But I think we've got a bit more practicing to do on the moon than maybe we imagined in pre-COVID conditions when Elon was ready to launch his Starship to Mars with hundreds of people any moment now. Now I think he has some other challenges to deal with. So
More terrestrial problems. They do tend to distract us. As you said, it's been quite a we've had people on the moon. The space kind of lost, if not interest, it certainly lost funding and impetus from the funders that traditionally have funded such explorations, which have either come from, as you said, billionaires who are setting their sights even bigger, or from governments. Why do you think it is we kind of had a space exploration winter, if you want to put it that way, very similar to the sort of parallels that have been drawn around other emerging technologies like blockchain or crypto or AI or anything? Why did we lose interest in life beyond the terrestrial plane, and why are we swinging a bit more to being more interested in these things again now? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting question. So I suppose there's always an interplay between the power dynamics. So the moon landing, as we know, was achieved in the midst of turbulent kind of war-driven time. Driven by attempts to dominate globally. So that was in the midst of the Cold War, and the US, against all odds, put men on the moon in a time where the computers that they used were inferior to even the simplest smartphone nowadays. So that really was achieving the seemingly impossible, perhaps out of a desire to achieve some kind of dominance. And perhaps that motivation was not a strong enough one to then maintain that expenditure, let's say, on that kind of exploration once that was achieved. So I've always been a big believer in curiosity-driven exploration. I think that's a more sustainable way to do it. And we have been continuously exploring the solar system, perhaps not with people, but through the various technologies we've sent out. It can be argued that the development of the camera, for example, and how highly resolved and small it is in part due to the missions to send the camera equipment to Mars, which sends us back the amazing footage that we see now in high resolution from the Perseverance and Curiosity and the Chinese rover as well. And that this drive has really enabled us to develop technology in the meantime. But back to your core question. Maybe we weren't ready at that point. When we look at all the conflicts breaking out on Earth, what is going to prevent that kind of conflict from hampering our progress on the surface of the moon, for example? And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how we deal with that in the coming years, because even though the moon is smaller than Earth, obviously it's not a small place, but everybody's going to the South Pole is like the key location where China's aiming to go, where India's planning to go, where the US is planning to build their base, and where a bunch of other people are planning missions, so private and national. And why is this? Well, the permanently shadowed craters that are there house ice, frozen water, which is an important resource for hydrogen fuel, for oxygen for the people to breathe, water, obviously, for agriculture and all sorts of other applications for the humans. So let's see how we deal with that. So for me, the moon's will always be part of Earth. It orbits Earth. It's only 3 days away with 1960s technology. It's 3 days away. So maybe we can improve that. But it's close. It's evacuable in a way that Antarctica is not even. So if you're in Antarctica for the winter, you can't get out for those months where the sea ice freezes around the continent. It's dark, it's windy, planes can't land. So the crews in Antarctica are obviously actually more remote than cruise on the moon, for example, because it's just a 3-day trip back, whereas in Antarctica you're there for the whole winter. So it's a good place to train for the rest of the solar system. So either whatever the reason for that delay is, I think now is a good time. Potentially we needed to develop technology to the point it is now, particularly monitoring systems. So to have all of the sensor and IoT sort of capabilities to monitor environmental parameters as well as physiological parameters and the computing power. And maybe we needed to have those, commercialized and kind of solved to some extent before we can send precious crews out in large numbers to permanently, rather than just planting a flag, but to really permanently be on the surface. Remote healthcare developments, all sorts of things that have really popped up in the last maybe 10 years are going to make that a lot more feasible than perhaps it would have been in the 70s, where it seems miraculous that people really were walking on the moon then. But maybe as a society we also needed to, I don't know if we have matured, I don't know what a mature humanity looks like. I hope we're getting closer to that and not further away. But I think when we're looking at the 6-month journey to Mars, this is a significant milestone beyond, a permanent base on the moon. So it probably is a good, in spite of me having wanted to skip that step, just because of the time I'm born, get straight to Mars, because who knows how long we have to practice on the moon for before we get to go live on other planets. So, but I think it is a wise probably move to, test your systems fully on the moon with permanent habitation before thinking about sending people off on a 6-month journey to another planet.
Yeah, but even if we stick with that sort of point there in terms of why it's paused, why it's come back, I think the next question is, of course, why it's important or why it is desirable for us to venture into becoming an interplanetary species. I'm sure there are many people that would say that perhaps we have more pressing problems here on Earth, and the question then becomes, does space exploration help us solve some of those problems that we have right here, or does it just add complexifying factors and make new problems for us, new geopolitical or solar political challenges and all the rest of it? Why is it necessary or even desirable for us to venture beyond the planet that we currently call home? And how have you overcome questions and objections from people who might think that it's a bit of an indulgent topic at this point in time, when we don't even have flushing toilets for people on Earth, for example? How do we balance the pressing present problems with the potential and scope of the entire universe?
Yeah, I think if there's a one-word answer to that, it's perspective. So I think exploration, and in particular space exploration, gives us perspective, and perspective is something we're in desperate need of right now. If we look back over the history of humanity, so the last 200,000 years, the latest era we're living in is very abnormal compared to the rest of that period. So for the rest of the period of humanity existing on the planet, exploration to uncharted territory, well, perhaps there are people living there already, but exploration to places people hadn't been to before was happening continuously, from the first hunter-gatherers getting in dugout canoes somehow and making it across to Australia. So the Aboriginals are the first to have thought to have left Africa around 70,000 years ago, all the way through to, exploration to Antarctica, which just 100 years ago was uncharted territory. The establishment of the United States by immigrants and other people leaving Europe for whatever reasons they may have been driven by, packing up and going to a new place and establishing a new culture has always been an option for humans, I think, until quite recently, where it's becoming crowded on this planet, and upping and leaving to another place and establishing another culture is pretty difficult. Perhaps now we have these online cultures emerging to fill in the gap of what would have been a physical sort of location shift and mind shift before is now maybe happening online. But I think we still crave that desire to think in new ways and establish societies with new ways of doing things. And I think the United States is a good analogy for what we may see beyond Earth, where not so new land in terms of, yes, there haven't been people living there, but the establishment, of a new paradigm. So, democracy, arguably, the kind of democracy that was established there, was the result of breaking away from the church. So this kind of establishment of a new way of thinking, perhaps in opposition to a previous paradigm, happened there. And this attracted adventurers, let's say, who came, and then, the US has been a superpower for some time on this planet, maybe coming to the end of that road. Exploring uncharted territory leads to new ways of thinking, because the challenges that one faces there are unprecedented and require new ways of thinking. So if we want to look more practically at the categories I've mentioned, so power, water, food, as you've said, flushing toilets, like healthcare, education, these basic things have not been solved. Like, not all humans have access to reliable power. Don't need to tell South Africans that. Not all humans, in fact, very few humans have access to clean drinking water reliably. Nutritious food, many people go to bed hungry. So these are categories that we still need to work on Earth, as you pointed out, and healthcare and education, require power, food, and water as a base before we can start talking about advanced, sophisticated healthcare and education systems. If we don't have those three in place, then we need to establish those first. So how has space contributed to these? And I think there are already examples of how solar power, for example, has enjoyed the kind of developments it has. We were exuberantly burning fossil fuel for like a lot of the second half of the 20th century. And if it weren't for developments in solar panel technology aimed for space missions, then we wouldn't be where we are today. Because in fact, the first solar powered satellite was launched in 1958, just 1 year after the first satellite. So the realization, obviously, that burning fossil fuel in a vacuum is not going to work, has been a good way to drive progress in an alternative power source like solar power, like nuclear. Water filtration systems. Commercially available water filtration systems, or even on a municipal or city level, have also enjoyed stimulation from the space industry, because when you can just move to a new, cleaner river, then why wouldn't you do that? And that's what humans have done most of our history. In the space station, that's not an option. Water is heavy. We know how much water we use if we've ever lived through water restrictions. So we have to recycle water in those kind of environments. And this has, again, driven different technologies and developments in water filtration systems, recycling processes, etc. Food, even LED lighting that's required to grow food inside, has a lot of stimulation from the space industry. Since the 80s already, we've been trying to grow plants in space out of curiosity, and also out of a long-term goal to produce food in space for people living in space. And so developments in growing crops in confined environments, which has been in parallel lately to urban farming, smart farming, vertical farming, whatever you would call it. Arguably, we did this in space first also. So those are just three kind of basic examples of how food, water, and power have been driven by the crazy idea of having people live in Earth orbit. And although we haven't developed much from 6 people having lived continuously in Earth orbit in the space station for the past 20 years, not the same people. This is where we're at right now. So, we're going incrementally. We've got good at living in Earth orbit for the last 20 years. And now it's time to go a bit further. And in fact, it's going to be easier being on the surface of a body like the moon. Living in the vacuum of space comes with its own challenges. Having an environment like the moon where you can extract resources like water is really another level of our exploration beyond Earth. So that's the next step, practicing resource extraction from the place where we set up camp.
Resource extraction is one point, but you also brought up, of course, trying to grow food essentially in captivity. What is the current status of breeding in captivity? Not just potential food sources, but also people as such. I mean, we know that birth rates across planet Earth have been declining, largely due to our own shifting values, shall we say, but also due to biological reasons too. It's not that easy to get creatures to breed in captivity, whether they be pandas or whether they be human beings stuck in a city with exorbitantly high cost of living expenses and not particularly good food or air quality. What are the actual practical status of the ability for humans not just to get to space, to live in space, but actually to breed in space, which would be necessary for us if we wanted to even go as far as somewhere as Mars, right? I mean, these are essentially kind of one-way trips and won't be particularly successful unless you find ways to sort of continue the journey. And how does that tie back to what you were just saying around developments in science and technology that can be, it would be developed for trying to make the space thing work, but then have obviously implications for us back here on Earth. So I don't know if you have any thoughts there. Otherwise, I can pull out a few threads.
Yeah, let me chat on that. But I just wanted to add some more to the previous answer. Actually, I got sucked into the technology. But I think, yeah, when we look into the unknown, whether we're thinking about tomorrow or looking up at the night sky, you know, there's a sense of wonder, I think, and exploring space is just an easy way, I think, to tap into that human desire to explore beyond what we know. And I think the technologies that come out of that exploration are just an added bonus. You know, the real motivation is that we find ourselves in this reality. We try to understand this reality. Unsuccessfully a lot of the time. It's still very confusing, but we come up with some answers that enable us to build stuff. And we grow our world, you know, beyond the little village where we may have lived. Now we're in a global society where we can send messages or video clips or have conversations with people instantly, even in the space station or anywhere on the surface of the planet. So I think a sense of unity comes out of that embracing the unknown, because we're all on the spaceship essentially hurtling around our sun together. And that's to go back to that sense of perspective, you know, whether it's satellites giving us GPS data or enabling us to swipe our cards in a global financial system, the satellites, and imagine the advancements that are going to come when we have technology beyond Earth orbit. I think this is the reason why we explore, to get a better perspective on this like unfathomable reality that we find ourselves in. And I think humans have always been driven by wondering and questioning and curiosity and the need for adventure. So space exploration, I think, deals with that aspect. Not that everybody needs to leave the planet, because Earth is going to be an easier place than any other place in the solar system to live, except for the political uncertainty, maybe resource-wise, let's say. Earth, we can breathe the air, liquid water is available on the surface, food grows by itself. So in spite of that, we still have challenges, partly because of our large population. So I know a lot of people are worrying about the birth rate, but I'm not one of them. 8 billion people is a lot, and a great resource for space exploration. So I don't think we have any need to grow. That's not one of the challenges I'm working on, let's say. Adding to the human population, I can think of more pressing challenges to work on, like yeah, finding resources for all of these people. So I don't think a decline in human population is going to be a problem. Because yeah, we're confined to a single planet. You know, if we had societies living all over the solar system and we were extracting resources from the asteroid belt, then I would say resources are not a challenge, but at the moment they are. So we need to become more efficient at the way we manage our resources before we can start planning for a family of 20 billion people or whatever, whatever the people want us to get the population to. I'm not sure what their ultimate goal is. So the trips to Mars, thanks to SpaceX and the Starship, which will be a reusable vehicle that can refuel on Mars, potentially with fuel manufacturing capability. Certainly on the moon, I think people are aiming for that, with the water extraction to produce hydrogen as a fuel on the surface of the moon. And on Mars, perhaps it would be a methane-based fuel, or the atmosphere. Mars has an atmosphere, the moon doesn't. So again, we're getting more access to more resources the further we go. So space station, there's no regolith, there's no atmosphere. On Mars, on the moon, you've got the regolith you can access for resources. On Mars, you've got the regolith and the atmosphere. So with carbon dioxide, you can do something to produce fuel. There are a bunch of different approaches you could take. And so the Starship will be refuelable, and therefore it will be a potentially return mission. So I think the closest we can look at is probably people who go to Antarctica. So people would typically stay there for a year or maybe two. Mars trips might be slightly longer because of the travel time, 6 months currently. Maybe we can reduce that, but I think we're looking at a handful of years, probably expedition for people. Probably they're not going to stay there initially because maybe people would choose to stay there. But of course, we've got a lot of research to do on the long-term health implications of living in a completely different environment like Mars. So I'm not sure that we need to deal with the reproduction beyond Earth problem soon, but obviously eventually that is going to become a thing, whether accidentally or planned. We're going to have to figure out how that works. Yeah, there have been some experiments with mice in the space station. I believe not all the results imply that this would be a good thing to dive into. I think there's a lot more research to be done. but life surprisingly does seem to be quite resilient to the zero or microgravity environment of Earth orbit. Like plants grow towards the light, it doesn't seem to bother them too much. Humans do have some health implications, but these seem to be reversible, particularly for the short sort of 6-month trips that people usually make. On Mars, there is gravity, so yeah, we can't even speculate, basically. We have no idea. We're going to have to send people and start testing. Like, the human body is one of the least understood phenomena in the universe. So at this point, even though we're advanced enough to get to Mars, I think it's largely going to be like trial and error, whereby we learn about the health implications of being there. And probably accidentally that we discover whether or not it's feasible to reproduce there. Of course, we will attempt to eliminate these possibilities. Yeah, but I think in our lifetime, we can probably safely say it would be a more research-based activity, maybe with a bit of tourism in the coming decades.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned the tourism piece, because that was the other thing that I wanted to ask you. And that was, when it comes to funding, how we actually expand beyond Earth into the atmosphere and into the universe. What are the various pros and cons there? Because essentially, how do we, and if we even want to, or do we even want to, prevent essentially space exploration being essentially expropriated to the ends of either the global sort of nationalist warfare system or towards the ends of capital, which seems to be the two routes that we have to get enough resources together to essentially go off planet. You need the weight of a government, which currently on planet Earth are tied to national geographies and have national interests, even though space is supposed to be in theory, for everyone. We see this already with the moon, right? The moon now being seen as a resource or as a military base, as opposed to merely just an object in the sky with which to worship like a god, like we did in the long ago days of humanity. And then we also see the commercialization of space in some rather sort of cheesy ways, like space cruises, like the most crass commercialization that you can have even of tourism is one of the first things that we kind of see taking place there. And of course, then also conversations around, as you mentioned too, resource extraction, which I think is very interesting to compare to what you started speaking about right at the beginning. A lot of your work is looking at how we can survive, work around, even thrive around resource scarcity. It certainly bears thinking about that opening up space resource extraction not only enables growth, it also almost becomes an excuse for increased growth at a very interesting point in Earth's history, where for pretty much the first time ever, we have nation states and even corporations and even banks, if you're kind of following some of the signals and noise coming out of there, that are talking about trying to move from a growth-based society towards a sustainability or even degrowth-based society. We don't have to debate the merits of whether we want that or not, but opening up space suddenly takes away the necessity of having to survive with what we've got. It almost creates an excuse and an impetus to continue the growth cycle. And the growth cycle is obviously very closely tied to the debt cycle, with which a lot of what we're talking about is being funded by. It's being funded by debt-based national spending or by investments, sort of debt-based spending on the capitalist side. So anyway, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on how, or if we should, or if this is not something we should be concerned about at all, and it's actually wherever money and power comes from, let it perpetuate. Or are there things that we should be perhaps concerned about in terms of the future of space as a shared resource?
Yeah, that's a deep one. So let me talk about some concrete stuff first. So you've mentioned our single individuals, like high net worth individuals, are now able to leverage what would have previously been government programs. So let's take Elon Musk as an example. So Starlink, I've seen, yeah, there's some issues with the investment from the US government having been removed recently, I think, but let me not quote on that. But okay, until I read that yesterday. So Starlink has been doing very well, because if you launch tens of thousands of satellites, yes, you can provide high speed, good bandwidth internet to people all over the planet, like all over. So except South Africa, where it's illegal. So this is a great business model to fund a expansion beyond one planet to another, in fact, because if we're looking at around $100, and I think it's more than that now, per month for access to what we consider like a fundamental basic necessary resource for humans, internet. You can imagine that around a billion, you know, it's not unreasonable to think that hundreds of millions and maybe in the future even billions of people may be subscribers to this internet connection. Okay, let's say hundreds of millions at $100 a month. So now we're actually looking at the kind of money that is required to sustain a space program. So this is great. The implications of having tens of thousands of satellites in Earth orbit, yeah, there are pros and cons to that. Space debris is a huge issue. And so once SpaceX has started launching tens of thousands of satellites, Amazon and China and various other entities are also getting involved. So we are going to have a lot more satellites in Earth orbit, which implies that we need better regulations. Otherwise, you know, eventually you can have a catastrophe where you've got so much debris in orbit that it actually becomes challenging to launch from your planet. So you can actually prevent yourself from doing future exploration by launching too many satellites. But that's kind of an extreme. On the extreme side, yeah, the downfalls of space debris. We need to think about better regulations around what happens to these satellites when they stop working or crash into each other. And there's a lot of work to be done there because at the moment there's no way to legally hold someone responsible for their space junk. If it crashes into another satellite, for example, who pays to clean that stuff up? This all needs to be clarified. By a global body that's then able to enforce these regulations, which becomes difficult. So at the moment, it's normally the country from which you launch provides the regulations for what you do in space. But we're going to need to do better than that and have some international agreements that we agree on if we're going to continue to populate our orbit with so many pieces of technology. Okay, but that is one way to fund a Mars mission. So other ways are using taxpayers' money, for example, and then that comes with all the debates about whether that should be spent otherwise. But I think this is one example of how you can break through that barrier and really create a business model where you can actually start, you know, settling humans on another planet and pay for it. So the economics, yeah, well, if we're trying to look at the moon and trying to imagine analogies with Earth, so I've said, you know, Antarctica can be one area where we can compare it. So we've been living in Antarctica temporarily on research basis for like 100 years. And so far there's been no conflict there. And one of the primary reasons for this, I think, is that the commercialization is in principle, I mean, there are aspects of it happening anyway, but in principle, commercialization has been forbidden in Antarctica by the Antarctic Treaty, which somehow most people, at least on the surface, have appeared to conform to. So we're not mining or extracting oil or fuel or anything like that in Antarctica because of the Antarctic Treaty. So if we want to compare the moon to Antarctica, the first thing we can notice is that NASA's already commercialized the moon. So they've already put a price tag on water in order to stimulate companies who might be able to get there and extract this ice, obviously, and then melt it into water, and that NASA would buy it from them. So, you know, for startups looking at developing lunar rovers, being able to sell the water ice that they extract as, you know, one of their projects becomes a way to kind of sustain the mission. So the moon's already commercialized, but this is not unexpected given that we live in a you know, we've got basically the global economy now. It's capitalism, and it's not surprising that the moon, as part of the Earth system, would also be capitalist. Okay, so we've got that. So what kind of impact is that going to have for activity on the moon? And I mean, yeah, looking at the supply chain disruptions and things that happened during the COVID pandemic or during the Ukraine conflict, I think we can foresee further disruption to supply chain stuff like the chip shortage, for example. And I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that some companies with the resources may say, we're just going to manufacture on the moon because it's going to be easier. There's not going to be any disruptions because we own the vehicles that are transporting the products or materials to and fro. We're extracting the metals and minerals from the moon because essentially the moon is not very different to the composition of the Earth. So we haven't done a lot of investigation below the surface, but whatever you can find on Earth, pretty much you can probably find on the moon if you look for it. So I foresee this. I don't know on what time frame. Depends how desperate we get here on Earth. I don't know on what time frame it's going to be easier to manufacture, more reliable, let's say, to manufacture stuff on the moon than it is on Earth. Then we could also see perhaps avenues where the low gravity on the moon, it's a sixth of Earth. could facilitate the manufacture of things that aren't able to be manufactured on Earth, certain crystals or pharmaceutical applications or certain materials, highly, like graphene, for example, it needs to be highly regular arrangement of atoms. This kind of material production or synthesis could arguably be achieved in a higher quality way in a lower gravity environment. Yeah, so that's something interesting to watch. But I think, we shouldn't feel that we can prevent that because, as I said, the moon is part of the Earth system. But in terms of economics and this like illusion of constant growth that our current system has, I think we can do far better than the current economic system. And most people kind of clam up when I say that and say, but communism didn't work, so that's a done deal. If communism didn't work, all we have is capitalism. But I disagree. I think we're lacking imagination. I think we can do better in terms of managing our resources, and the economic system is what essentially underpins that. Coming up with a new economic system, that's like the stuff of a life work. One PhD is probably not enough. Like you need a lot of thought into, or something could just emerge. So I don't think it's like a silver bullet thing where you can say, okay, this is the economic system. But I think to be better at managing resources, this like illusion that things will constantly continue to grow, it's not one that's serving us on a finite planet. However, then it gets more complex when you say, let's say we expand beyond Earth and start extracting stuff from the asteroid belt, because if you could bring back, 200 tons of platinum, like what would that do to markets on Earth? And this is the reality. There are a lot of resources out there in space. So this illusion of scarcity coupled with constant growth that provides the tension that we live with on a daily basis can all be, shown to be a bit silly when we look at how much resources there are available in the asteroid belt. So I could go on for hours. Sorry, let me cut this now. Let me summarize. I think what we need essentially is to extract the resources that each society needs from the location where they choose to live. And in the future, I imagine a group of people, let's say, blockchain revolutionaries, like packing up their spaceship with their 3D printers and their basic manufacturing capability on board, however many hundreds of tons that takes, and then they go off and live on the surface of an asteroid somewhere, constantly extracting whatever metals they need from there to produce their mining capability with their computing systems, their transistors, and they manufacture those all locally in space with the resources they extract from the celestial body where they've chosen to live. They got the freedom to implement their own ideology. They can create their own communication systems with Earth, and wherever else people are living. This is a cool future, I think, where you're not constrained by resources, because you need the fuel to get to the place you're going, and you need to get to a place where you're able to extract what you need from that place. But essentially, I think, a time where we can switch our arguments about resources to sort of, ideas of maybe justice or ethics would be a good thing. I think a time where people have the resources they need to then worry about a different set of problems, but we're not there yet. We're still having trouble with our basic resources: power, water, and food.
we got such big ideas. We've got such like deal with on a day-to-day basis, just even feeding our bodies, like it takes up so much time. We're going to make food and find food. We still haven't really evolved past that. But what you're saying there with setting up sort of autonomous civilizations, it's like taking the sea stating idea right through to some more space stating. But what I do find so interesting about conversations about space, particularly people like yourself who've spent time thinking about it, whether it's from an economic perspective or from a social perspective, is that as soon as we take conversations away from the terrestrial plane towards the solar plane or the universal plane, none of our constraints that we take for granted on planet Earth apply. You're no longer beholden to nation states or to ideas of government. Like you can start from a completely blank state. And what's interesting there is that how the ideas tend to merge very quickly once you move beyond those fake constraints that you also speak of, the sort of illusion of scarcity of ideas as well as scarcity of stuff, is how even as you speaking, your conversation and your ideas cut way across traditional political and socioeconomic lines immediately. Like the conversation is no longer having to choose between party pack politics with its pre-packaged ideas of whether you are left or right or up or down or brown or white or whatever the way our way of thinking about things. It opens up conversations conversations, to discuss things in different ways. And of course, Robert Anton Wilson, the weird conspiracy theorist slash fantasy character, and his ideas of how essentially the history of humanity has been in the pursuit of three different goals: the goal of infinite time, that is to live longer, to achieve some sort of immortality, whether that's through religion or through literal life extension, which is very closely related to the space conversation too. The second goal is to accumulate more stuff, whether that stuff be power or money or just physical stuff. And the third goal is to find infinite space, which seems to be a requirement to have new spaces, to try new ideas. That there's kind of this sense that on planet Earth, where it's been carved up and divvied up into nation states that have already run their current experiments, there's no space to try new ideas because we're trapped within a network of claimed space. So you kind of need new frontiers in order to actually develop new ideas. Otherwise, we are stuck with the past. And I think that's quite a nice way to sort of frame where we headed, which is a lot of chaos. None of this conversation should be sort of comfort making. There's nothing comfortable about exploration, like your work in going to try and live in deserts or in like icebergs, wherever you want to go. This is not a conversation around comfort. This is a conversation around extreme discomfort, and extreme discomfort that challenges the way we physically exist, but also the way that we interact with each other, all these systems. So in many ways, you are quite the provocateur there. I did want to also ask you how receptive the general conversation has been to projects like yours and setting up potential civilizations beyond the terrestrial plane, and whether you find people that when you're looking for funding, or when you're looking for partnerships, or whether you're looking for permission. Unfortunately, we still have to ask for permission for these sorts of things, whether you having to sort of tone down your message to sort of fit into levels of comfort, or whether there is a growing receptiveness to the absolute radical ask that you're really doing here, because this is asking to change and challenge everything. It's the opposite of safety, which is the current worldview. We all want to avoid pain. We want to avoid suffering. We want to avoid insecurity. We're very happy to go into lockdown rather than into exploring our own streets is scary for many of us. There's still people that would like lockdown laws to be in place, right? They're challenging all of this. You're saying we can't be safe. We have to be unsafe.
Yeah, great questions. We could have done a podcast on each of them probably. Yeah, I think to go back to that quote that you said, it would be nice to be able to stimulate new ways of thinking just by thinking. But I think by the nature of being physical bodies that need resources and live in space and time, it's a great quote, because I think you actually sometimes physically have to go into new spaces in order to generate new ways of thinking about space and time and resources. And so for me, the ultimate goal would be I think it would be really inspiring for people on Earth to see a group of people living on the surface of Mars. And, back when the Mars One project was saying it's happening, I think it was supposed to happen next year originally. So we were a bit idealistic back in the early 20-teens about how fast space exploration was going to happen. But it would be hugely, I think, inspiring if a group of people can establish a little community, a happy one, maybe even on the surface of Mars, then, anything is possible. And I think this idea of moving through space, just to sort of shock people into paying attention firstly, and then with some, ultra human effort to just really try and work together as a team and demonstrate that the lack of reasonable power systems as we used to on Earth, the lack of water, the lack of food, the fact that we have to all work together to ensure that these basic fundamental requirements for humanity are produced by the team, and the kind of coherence of vision and the coherence between the team and the sense of team spirit that emerges from that, I think would be if there were one event that you could sort of pull off that could inspire the highest number of people on Earth, whether they are living with a lot of material possessions or whether they're living in poverty. I think across the board, this would be a moment of inspiration. I think if we can do it on Mars, then why can't we solve poverty on Earth? Because, people, we try to eliminate poverty, but are we doing that with any success? And I think perhaps the celebration of resource constraints can be seen as part of the package of solving this poverty mindset, as well as obviously providing basic resources for people. I think this kind of project would tick all of them, from like how we deal with our sewage all the way through to the wonderful conversations we have around our Martian dinner about the fact that we live on another planet. You know, it just does the whole spectrum. So for me, this would still be the ultimate kind of project that I am and would and focus my time on as a way to inspire people on Earth. So how have other people responded to this? And I think, yeah, people sometimes comment after I've given a presentation and so on, and to my face, they always say it was wonderful to engage in this kind of imagination. But it seems like people do respond really well to engaging in this kind of imagination. And with kids, it's like a no-brainer. How do you inspire kids? It's normally either dinosaurs or space. You know, they either want to go back in time or forward in time and imagine some other world that's beyond their current reality. And in fact, it's the same for adults. I think the power of imagination and the power of the unknown to inspire is really strong. And to people who are, and all of us, seeking comfort and reliability and predictability, I say, well, actually, you're on the wrong planet then. So let's just embrace the fact that we're on probably the most unpredictable planet in the solar system. You know, Mars may be harsh and difficult to live on, but nothing much changes there. The temperature, average temperature is always around -60. You know, maybe there's a windstorm. That's pretty much the only weather that comes there. The rest of Mars is really predictable. Like, there's not a lot going on there because there's no life that we can see, making things complicated yet.
That's difficult to that mix, you know, all everything.
Yet. But it's life, right? It's life that makes it complicated, in particular people, like the most complex life forms that have emerged here on Earth. So we are living in space. We're living on a very unpredictable planet. So best we change our mindsets to one where we embrace the unknown, where we say we love adventure, we love unpredictability, we love load shedding. It challenges us to think about challenges in new ways and come up with new solutions to them. It makes us more robust. It makes us more resilient. It makes us more adaptable. And these are all words coming out of the, you know, corporate speak, or whatever the language that people are evolving. But in fact, the unpredictability of our planet drives these things anyway. Like, we are becoming more resilient because of the lack of predictability in our world. So let's stop pretending that, you know, things will ever be comfortable or predictable. They won't. Let's embrace it and become adventurers, explorers, you know, people who love you know, a spanner being thrown in the works, because there will be a spanner in the works. So enjoy it, you know. Yeah, I think also in terms of appreciating our planet more. You know, if you've lived in the same town your whole life, you probably don't appreciate the beautiful clean water or your local restaurants as much as you would if you traveled to a bunch of other places and realized the grass is not greener on the other side, and there's a lot to love about this planet and the people and all the animals and creatures and plants that we share it with. And we should be more grateful for all of that stuff, because I think as we explore beyond Earth, we'll, you know, really see the uniqueness of our planet in a way that maybe we don't see when it's where we live. And maybe appreciate the busyness and the lack of predictability that all the living systems here create, particularly each other. Yeah.
Yeah, that is life, right? Life is full of contradictions, and life is all about risk and death at the end of the day. You know, it's all kind of goes together. All we can do is try and stretch that time and that space kind of as far as we can to learn to know thyself, but also know that universe at the same time. It's always useful to sort of spin between those two lenses. But I think what you said was a much better place to end this off. I wanted to give you the last word in terms of people wanting to connect with you if they are interested in growing in extreme missions to extremely uncomfortable places, if they're interested in challenging norms of power and privilege, if they're interested in, I don't know, sponsoring whole sort of, you know, multimedia shows that you're talking about, whatever the case might be. If people are interested in you and your work and what you are doing, where can they find you? How can they get involved? And if you are interested, or if anyone's listening to this that is interested in the concept of space themselves, if there are any sort of resources you can point people towards, that would also be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bronwyn. So at proudlyhuman.com, you can just fill out the contact form that comes to me. If any of this has been of interest, that comes to me. So yeah, at the Foundation for Space Development Africa, we're actually trying to demonstrate that through collaboration, we can do a world first, you know, put Africa in first position in space for the first time ever by putting this radio telescope on the moon, and we are purely collaborative. So if anyone out there wants to contribute to the project, then please get in touch. So far, we have been riding on the inspiration and the shared vision of people with a bit of spare time to contribute to the project. And if we actually get there first, NASA's budgeted around $2 billion to do a project that we're going to pull off basically free. If we get it right and get there before them, that'll be a great testimony to the power of collaboration. So thanks to anyone out there who feels like they want to participate, or even if any of these ideas have inspired anything else unrelated, then that's great. That's the idea. I think we need more inspiration. We need more collaboration. Proudlyhuman.com, you can read more about the stuff. But if it's just put a smile on your face or made you look up at the stars tonight, then that's great too.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time to come and chat to us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Bronwyn. Great chat.
That's right, I'm wearing red. I did that very deliberately to try and capture your attention instead of my usual black. I did that because I've got quite an important and very exciting, for me at least, announcement. And that is that our new book, Rescuing Our Republic, which has been written in conjunction with my friends and colleagues at Discourse ZA, is now out and about in bookstores across South Africa and available online for anyone else that is curious about South Africa. And as I've said before, as a futurist and a trained analyst and economist, I do think that South Africa is one of the clearest bellwethers as to where the weird Western world is headed. And as such, there's something you can learn from us at the bottom of Africa. We're ahead of quite a few of the trends that you're just wrapping your heads around. Anyway, this book is based on some of our most popular and most revealing, interesting, and important conversations that we've had over the last couple of years at Discourse ZA, which is a YouTube channel you should absolutely subscribe to. It's also available as a podcast if you're interested in anything to do with politics, philosophy, and economics. But the conversations in this particular book are focused on, as the title says, rescuing our republic, or more specifically, what civil society and individuals should be thinking about and doing and starting if they are interested in investing in a future for South Africa that we actually want to be a part of. Anyway, I would love for you to read this book and to give it to someone either that you like or that you hate, because the purpose of this book is to kickstart conversations around big, interesting, ugly even, but important ideas that are worthy of debate. So if you're planning on being bored or understimulated at a family or friend event this festive season, this is the book you need to give you the conversation starters to start a debate or a fight with those who you love or love to hate most.